In this episode, we're going to go ahead and continue building the components that belong on the homepage. We're building 2 of the 4 components. The 2 that you see on the screen are the ones that are going to be built. We're also going to add scroll animations to those, so we'll be using the React intersection observer. Now for the first half of this episode, the audio is completely messed up. It was speaking the entire time and I didn't know until I listened to it afterwards. So this is just me warning you guys that it is going to be bad up until the 10 or 11 minute marker. After that, it should be a bit fine. It won't happen again, but it does sound like a kid screaming on Xbox. Sorry about that. Before we jump into VS Code, I do want to say that I am using Firefox for this video. No, I'm not switching over to Firefox from Chrome. Even though Firefox is great, Chrome is acting a bit buggy right now. It's not loading the font weights for me. And I think that there is an open issue that's already been made regarding this. So maybe by the time you watch this, it's not causing the issue, but currently it is. So we're not going to be using Chrome. We'll be using Firefox. Now to build out the rest of the homepage components, we're going to go ahead and open the homepage folder and create a new file. This file is going to be called home-content.js. Let's go ahead and do RAFCE to bring out a functional component. Like always, we're going to build the JSX out, so let's go ahead and do that. We'll call this home content section. And then inside the home content section, we're going to use a container. And inside the container, we'll create a styled components called content. Now, of course, you can write whatever you want in here, but I'm going to copy the content from the Furrow website. I'm going to go ahead and paste that, save to format, and I'm also going to add a break right here. Let's add a self-closing one. Let's go ahead and bring in the styled components. So I need to bring in container. Let's go ahead and bring in container. And since container is a reusable styled component, we already have it made. And we'll do the same for the home content section and the content. So I'm going to copy and paste what we have for container, but import home content section and content. And we're importing this not from global styles, but from home styles. Go ahead and save this, and we can jump into the styles folder inside home styles and then scroll to the bottom, and we'll create a new section and we'll just comment saying this is going to be the content section. Now, like always, we'll have to export the variables we created. So what do we have? We have home content section, and we also have just content. I don't need to copy that. So we'll set these to styled.div. And I'll copy and paste this again, except I'll switch the div to an h2 and I'll switch this to just say content. Let's go ahead and save this and go into our pages directory inside index.js. And we already have home banner rendered out. Let's render out the home content, and we'll need to import home content similar to what we did for the home banner. Just change it to say home content. And let's save that. Let's preview what we have. And we can't really tell if the text is loading, except now we can because we have to switch it to the light theme. So the text is loading now, but we need to style it accordingly. Let's go back in our project, and inside the home styles JS, let's go ahead and add a margin bottom of 200 pixels for the home content section. And then for our content, let's set the width to 53%. Our font size is going to be 2.3 rem. We're going to set the font weight to 400 and a margin left of 124 pixels. And finally, for the color, we're giving it the props.theme.text. So I'll copy what we have above and paste it there. Let's save this and preview what we have. You can see that if we scroll down, we have our text styled accordingly, which is neat. If we switch the theme, it will be in the white version. Now in the final version, we do have animations that occurs here. So when we scroll down a bit, the text fades in and up. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go back in our project inside the home content.js, and we'll need to import a few things. The first thing we're importing is to capture the scroll behavior, and we'll import, we'll say use in view, and we're going to import use in view from the React intersection observer. And if you clone the project from the beginning of the video, you should have the React intersection observer package already installed. If not, go ahead and install that. We also need to import use animation, and we're importing this from Framer Motion. What the use animation hook allows us to do is to add controls to our animations, meaning we can start and stop the animation. Now, when we're using this use in view from the intersection observer, we're going to know when the user has scrolled to the position, and once they have, we will then use animation to play the animation we define. So let's go ahead and build that. So first, we need to use the use animation hook. So I will say const animation is set to the use animation hook, and to use in view, we'll do something like so. So we'll do an array similar to sort of the use state. We'll pass in we'll say this is content ref, and then we'll say in view, and we'll assign it to use in view. And we can use it like this, but we also want to pass in some options. So some of the options we could do is trigger once. And what trigger once does, and if we set it to true, is only trigger the animation one time. So if we scroll down, it will trigger the animation once. If we scroll back up, it won't trigger it again. And so if we scroll the third time, it won't trigger it. I don't like visiting websites when I scroll down and scroll back up, the animations continue on happening. I just want to see it one time, and I don't want to be bombarded with a bunch of animations scrolling up and down the page. So that's why I'm going to set it to true. The second option is a root margin. And what we're going to do with the root margin is set it to -300 pixels. And actually, I'm going to comment this one out just so that I can show you what it does here in a second. I don't want to describe it, I just want to show you first. So what content ref is going to represent is it's going to represent the ref of the home content section. And then the end view will return a true or a false. And so if end view is true, we will run the animation in Framer Motion. If not, then the animation won't run just yet. So let's go ahead and assign the reference to the home content section. So I will do ref, and I will set this to the content ref. I'm then going to set animate to our use animation hook. So I'll say animate is going to be equal to animation. The initial animation is going to be set to hidden. And hidden is not defined yet, but since we're using variants, we'll then need to define what hidden is. So in our variants, you can write your variants outside of the tags, but you can also write them in here. So let's do that. We're going to set visible to an opacity of 1, a Y of 0, and a transition with a duration of 0.6. And then we'll give it we'll give it its custom easing. The easing we always give it is the 0.6, 0.05, -0.01, and a 0.9. Let's go save that so that we could format it. We also need to define another property inside the variance, and this one's going to be hidden. All hidden's going to do is set the opacity to a 0 and a Y of 72. Now to explain this a little more, let me close that. What's happening is the initial is set to hidden, and so the initial state is going to have the content ref set to an opacity of 0, and it's going to be pushed down 72 pixels. Once in view is set to true, we will then run this visible animation, which will set the opacity to 1 and then push the entire div to a Y position of 0, meaning it will push up. So the way that we need this to happen is we'll be required to use a use effect, and this needs to be destructured. Okay. So we'll write use effect, and it's going to require dependencies, which we'll write here in a second. So we'll have an if statement. We'll say if in view, then we'll want to execute the certain commands to run visible. To run visible with the animation hook, we'll do animation, which we'll call the hook dot start. This will start the animation, and we can pass an argument. Specifically, we'll want to say visible, meaning that when in view is true, we'll start the animation of visible, and it will run the visible animation. Let's save this, and we're going to add animation as a dependency, as well as in view. Because in view is automatically set to false, once in view is true, it will then trigger this use effect. Now before we preview, we need to make sure that the home content section is in fact a motion component. Otherwise, all this gibberish here would not work. Jump into home styles.js and select the .div, erase that, and then turn the styles component into a styled motion component. Let's save this and go back to the home content section. And let's preview it first before we talk about root margin. Let's go back to the project and refresh. And now when we scroll, you can see that the animation occurs. Let's test that out again. Let's switch up the theme. Perfect. So it's very subtle and it's hard to catch unless you're scrolling down rather quickly. So this is where the root margin comes in. What root margin is going to do is change the margin of the positioning, and it's not going to affect it in terms of the CSS, but only the ref. So what this means is it's going to add 300 pixels to the margin of whatever element we're targeting. And depending on the origin, if it's the origin at the top, then that means it's going to require us 300 more pixels to scroll until we reach that element. With the root margin enabled, we can see now that it's going to take a bit longer for us to scroll until we can have that animation occur. Now, the reason I do this is because sometimes without that root margin, users might just scroll through rapidly and they'll tend to miss that animation from occurring. Or they could just kind of scroll here and then not scroll all the way and then the animation already occurred. However, now we're adding that 300 pixels, meaning we can kind of get the entire div into frame and then animate. So let's scroll to the top and get rid of the root margin. You can see that now when I'm scrolling through, the animation is going to occur when we haven't really reached the entire div into its full frame. That's why adding that 300 pixel root margin really helps out a lot and make sure that the user gets the div into the full frame and then it will animate in. Okay, so now we can kind of copy this formula and continue it on for the other divs. We're going to move on from home content.js to the home feature.js. So let's go ahead and work on that component next. Similar to what we did with the home content.js, let's create a new file and we'll call it home feature.js. We can go ahead and close out of home content.js, write RAFCE, and we can get started on the JSX. The parent div is going to be called a home featured section. Inside the home featured section, we do have a container. And as a sibling to this container, we're going to have another container, like so. Now inside the first container, we have a link. And inside that link, we have a featured content. Now inside that featured content, we're going to have a flex and then an h3. And this h3 is going to say featured project. Now as a sibling to the h3, we're going to have a div with the class name of meta. And inside meta, we're going to have an h4, which will say PEI seafood. And then another h4 with the year, so 2019. So the h3 is the title, which represents the featured projects, and then the meta will be metadata related to the project. Now outside of the flex, but still being in the featured content, we're going to have an h2, and we're going to give it a featured dash title. I put title, but it's going to be title for the class name. And inside the h2, we're going to say not humble in all caps, or you could just use the text transform to uppercase in CSS. But we also want to add a break. And then still being inside the h2, we're going to add a span with the class name of arrow. And inside the span with the class name of arrow, we're going to have an SVG. Now this SVG is going to be the exact same one that we used for our menu. So we can just copy this right here and paste it in. Let's save that so that I could format and then just get rid of these comments. You can always access this SVG similar to what I did back in the social icons. It's commented out. Let's close the social icons and continue. Now outside of the featured content, but still being in the link, we're going to add a featured video. And so this is going to represent that background video that will play. We can put a video in here. We're going to set it to loop, setting it to autoplay. And for the source, we're going to have to require and then just add the path name. So it'll be dot forward slash inside the assets folder, inside video. And then we're going to add the featured dash video.mp4. Let's save that to format, and then we can work on the second container we made. Now this container is going to be related to the featured projects. So we could add a featured projects. And then we'll reuse the flex component that we created. And as an attribute, let's go ahead and add flex end, because we want it on the right side of the screen. And inside that flex, we'll add a button. And inside that button, we'll have a span tag saying all projects, like so. So we've got the JSX laid out for us. Let's go ahead and inside the home styles, let's create all these styled components, import them, and then we'll render the home featured component onto the index page. So like always, we first need to import. So I'll create a comment section for styled components. And then I will import the ones that we know have already been made. So we've got container and we've also got flex. And these are going to come from the global styles. We've also got the followings, which are new. We've got the home featured section, and I'm just going to copy and paste. We've got the featured content, a featured video, and let me move to the right a bit, and the featured projects. Now these are all being imported from the home styles. So styles and then home styles. Let's go ahead and save that. And then we can copy them all and paste them in the home styles.js. And let's make this full screen now. Now I want to export each and every one. So let me see if I could do this in a bulk format. So we'll do styled.div like so. And then at the very beginning, let's do export const like so. Now I do apologize if there's a lot of construction in the background. They're doing some work outside the apartment, and I'll do my best to cut it out in post. Now let's save this, and inside the index.js, let's import the home featured, and we can import that from home featured like so. And let's check if, so we're missing the link, and that's because we need to import link from Gatsby in the home feature.js. Go ahead and import link at the top, and then let's preview the project now. So if we refresh, scroll down, we get that animation, and then we've got the featured project right here. Of course it's going to be ugly, that's because we need to style it now. So let's work on the styles real quick. Let's go to home styles.js, and we'll start with the home featured section. We're going to give it a margin bottom of 200 pixels, a position set to relative, and then inside the home feature section, we did have that link, which is going to be an A tag. We'll also give that link a margin bottom of 200 pixels, a position of relative as well, and a display set to block. We can scroll down to the featured content section, and the height that we're going to give this featured section is going to be 480 pixels, with the width, set that to 100%. Give it a padding of 56 pixels with a 124 pixels on the left and right. So top and bottom will be 56, left and right 124, and then a box sizing set to border box. Our color is going to be set to the prop theme text, so we can copy and paste that like we've done before. And then nested inside the featured content is the H3, and the font size of our H3 is going to be 1.4 rem. And now we have that meta class, so we could do the .meta, and let me scroll down a bit. We're going to set the display to flex, and H4, which is inside the meta. What we're going to do here is just add margin to the last child. So we can have the last dash child, and then we'll give it a margin left of 1 rem, just to give them some space. Let's save this and see if we can preview what we have. Okay, so this is the part we're working on right here. And then you can see that the 2019 has that margin left that we just added. Back in our project, we can keep going. And now outside of the meta, we have the feature title. The feature title is going to have an absolute position, a bottom set to negative 128 pixels. The font size will be set to 7 rem. Our font weight is going to be set to 900 pixels, not pixels, but just 900. And the line height will be set to 90 pixels. Finally, we're going to have a margin set to 0. And if we take a look at now, we have this not humble, which is going to look like that, but then the arrow is going to be on the bottom. And so when we hover, it's going to give us an animation for the arrow. We can work on the arrow, which is nested inside the feature title. So we have the arrow class, and the arrow class is going to have a width set to 120 pixels, a height set to 80 pixels, a display of block, which will be set to a position set to relative, and an overflow of hidden. The overflow hidden will allow us to kind of manipulate the way that it looks in terms of flowing, in terms of its width growing from that left to right. The SVG itself is going to have a position of absolute. The top is going to be set to 16 pixels. The left will be negative 48 pixels. The width, let's add that to 108 pixels. And what we want to do is we want to change the color depending on the theme color. So the way to change the color of the SVG is we're going to have to target the path, which is nested inside the SVG, and then set the fill to this props.theme.text, like so. Let's go ahead and save this and preview now. So you've got not humble with the arrow, and when we hover on this video section, this arrow should kind of increase in size or scale. If we change the theme and check it out here, you can see that it's white now. Let's refresh and take a look. Okay, perfect. So everything seems to be working like we want it so far. Now that's going to complete it for the featured content. We can then work on the featured video. The featured video is going to have a position of absolute, a z-index set to -1, just so that the content or the text can lay on top of it. The width is going to be 100%, which will ultimately stretch out to whatever the parent is. And so the relative parent is the container. The height is going to be 480 pixels. We're going to have a top of 0, a display set to block, and an overflow hidden, just so that we can kind of fill it to the max of the container. Let's save this and preview. If we scroll down, you can see that now that this featured content kind of fills up that container section, and it looks pretty well. This feature project section doesn't seem to be aligned correctly, and that's because we need to add an attribute on the flex, which will add space between. My cat started eating his food, so there's going to be some bells and whistles in the background. Let's go to the home feature.js, and for the attribute, we'll add a space between. Let's save this, and then now it kind of separates it into the two different sections. Perfect. We can then work on the all projects to make it that red button. And what all projects will do is just open up the navigation menu. Let's go to the project, and in the home styles.js, we can work on this featured projects. Featured projects will have a margin top set to 200 pixels. And then the button, which is inside of the featured projects, will have a background color. And the background color is going to be set to the props theme.red and a color of white. The position is going to be relative. The padding is going to be 20 pixels. The display will be block. The text align will be set to left. And the font size is going to be 1.4 rem. Our line height is going to be 1. The font weight is going to be set to 600. Our border will be set to none. And now the span tag, which is inside the button, will have a margin right of 100 pixels, and then a display set to block. Now we also have to add pseudo elements for the menu. So if we take a look at what we have right now, we have a menu here that's supposed to go on the right side. So let's go ahead and add that with pseudo elements. Outside of the span tag, we can add a ampersand with the before and an ampersand with after. We'll set the content to empty quotes. Position will be absolute. The top is going to be 50%. The right is going to be 20 pixels. The width will be set to 35 pixels. The height is going to be 7 pixels. Our display is going to be set to block. And our background color will be white. So we could do FFF. And then we'll add a transform. And what we'll do with the transform, we'll translate the Y to -50%. So this will center it. This is a trick that we typically use to center absolute positioned items. vertically. We'll set the top to 50%, and then we'll add a transform translate y of -50, and that would allow us to center the item. Now targeting only the before, we're going to give it a margin top. Let me scroll down a bit. A margin top of -8 pixels, and we can copy and paste this, except that we are going to change the after to a margin top of 8 pixels. So let's save that, and we've got our hamburger menu here working perfectly. Now that's it for the styles. What we're going to do next is focus on the animations. So let's go back in our project, and we can close out of home styles.js and then work directly in the home feature.js. What I want to first do is go into index.js, and then I want to pass this on cursor function down to the home featured, and then in home featured, let's go ahead and bring in on cursor. So now when we hover on the featured content, we can say on mouse enter. We'll run the on cursor function and we'll pass in hovered. And then for the on mouse leave, we'll just run the on cursor function. Let's save this and go back to our project. So now when we hover on the not humble or the video, the cursor will let the user know that we can now click anywhere here and it will take us to the project. So now we can go back in our project, and we're also going to add the animations for the SVG to hover. So what I'll do is I'll create state real quick. I'll do a hovered state and I'll say set hovered. And hovered will always be false unless we've hovered on the featured content. So what I'll also do is in the featured content, add a on hover start, and this will run a function that will set hovered to the opposite of what hovered is. So we can do hovered. Now I said set hover here, but make sure we change that to set hovered. And then what we're changing set hovered to is the opposite of whatever hovered is. We'll copy and paste on hover start and change this to on hover end and leave it like so. So now when we hover, it will set it to true. When we hover off, it will set it to false. Now this will allow us to scroll down to the SVG. So we can turn this SVG into a motion component by writing motion.svg. This will require us to import motion from framer motion. So import motion from framer-motion. And then when we scroll back down to the motion SVG, where is it at? Right here. We can add an animate, and we can add a conditional here. So we'll say X, if hovered is set to true, we'll change it to 48. Otherwise, we'll set it to 0. And then we also want to add a transition because the default easing isn't really all that nice. We'll add a duration set to 0.6, and the easing we always use. I think this is a good idea to kind of store this ease into a variable and then share it across, because I'm tired of writing the same ease over and over. But we're just going to continue on. .-01, and then the final one is 0.9. So now let's take a look at our project, and we got an error because we don't have a comma right here. Oops, no we do, but we need to have the negative before the decimal point. So let's save this, go back in our project. UState's not imported, so let's import UState at the very top. Now before we preview this, we also need to make sure we turn the featured content into a motion component. So let's open up the home styles again, and then the featured content, where's it at? Here. Turn this into a motion component, motion.div. If you are working through and following along, if you ever add any of framer motion properties or attributes and they don't work, just check to make sure that they are motion components. Otherwise, they just won't do anything. Now let's preview, and then you can see that when we hover on the video, the SVG does animate. Perfect. One thing we're missing is that PEI 2019, this meta div should not be showing until we've hovered. So we can also do that. We can turn this class name meta to a motion component, so motion.div, and honestly it's going to be very similar to what we did to the animate. I'm going to copy and paste animate and transition from the SVG into this class of meta and save it, but we're changing X to opacity, and we're changing the values from 48 to 1. So now if we preview, when we're not hovered, the meta is gone. When we hover, it does fade in. and the SVG of the arrow does animate in. Okay, that's perfect. So let's go back to our project. And now the final thing we're missing is when we scroll to the top and refresh, as we're scrolling through, the feature project section needs to animate in, similar to what we did to this content section. So honestly, like I mentioned before, we're reusing a lot of what we built initially, and we can close out of the index.js because we don't need that anymore, but we do need the home content section. And let's split it up into two different views. I'll hit Command B to get rid of that left side, and we're kind of going to copy and paste here regarding the use in view and use animation. So we can copy and paste the imports of the scroll behavior, and then we can also copy and paste the use effect, the hook, and the use in view, and we'll paste that underneath this hovered and set hovered state, like so. I do want to change the content ref. I want it to say featured ref. So let's change the content to featured, just so that we can keep it consistent with the component that we're on. I'll leave animation to that use animation hook. And then if we scroll down a bit for the home featured section, we'll give home featured section a ref to that, oops, nope, not that, to the featured ref that we have up at the top, like so. I'm going to also copy what we have already coded out for the animate, the initial, and the variants. So let's do that. We can just copy everything here and then paste it in to the left side. So now if we preview our project, the use effect is throwing an error because we did not import use effect. So let's go ahead and import use effect at the top and save it. And then now if we refresh, we get this animation that loads in. And then if we scroll down, we get the content section, and then the not humble. So not humble is already loaded in, so we're missing something here. I think what we're missing is the fact that we didn't turn it into a motion component. Opening home styles, we need to turn the home featured section into a motion component. So motion.div. And then now if we scroll to the top and refresh, you can see that once we scroll down, that animates in, and then the home featured section also animates in. So that's absolutely pretty. Let's do it again. You land here, you do whatever you want with the cursor. You can also change the theme. I hate that. I want to fix that, but maybe one of the users can make a pull request and we could work together to fix it. But anyways, you scroll down, that animates in, and then the not humble section animates in. And then we've still got the SVG and the meta animating in. Okay, perfect. So that's going to do it for this section. We're then going to move on to creating that about section, which also has the accordions and the footer. If you did like it, go ahead and leave a like. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a wonderful day.